We can start. Good evening, everyone, and good morning to those who are attending, being based elsewhere. I hope you are all fine. My name is Pascal Stum. I'm the moderator of this webinar, and today I'm very pleased to welcome Helen Sayers, who is going to talk to us about Ubuntu, the spirit of humanity. You have the first slides on the screen. Might you wish to say hello? Feel free to use the chat box below. Please note that this webinar is going to be recorded and that you are all muted. So the only way to communicate is to use the webinars. So maybe a few words before passing the floor to Helen. A few words about Helen. Helen is based in France and has lived in Oman for 9 years, where she found Oasis Life Skills Training Services, and she provides a workshop in ethical leadership, intercultural awareness, women and youth empowerment. She has trained managers, teachers, and students in Africa, Asia, Europe, and in the Middle East. And Helen serves on the advisory board, Association for Living Value Education International. A very warm welcome to you, Helen, and just the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pascal, and a warm welcome to everyone who's tuned in now, wherever you may be and whatever time you may be. And I'm actually speaking from Oman. I've come here for a very short visit, just 10 days, to conduct some Ubuntu workshops for one of the ministries, one of the development banks, and Muscat municipality. So it's lovely to be here. It's nice and warm. I left Paris with snow just 5 days ago, and here I am in 33 degrees centigrade. But it's the human warmth that I'm feeling more than anything else in Oman. The people are very friendly, very warm. I feel very welcome here. And so here we are. Here's a warm welcome to all of you. And I hope I cover your language, wherever you may be. The first language here is marhaba, which is Arabic, of course, for welcome. And bienvenue from France, where I come from. And you can read here at the top, Ubuntu, the spirit of humanity. And this is something that I've been passionate about, actually, for about 15 years. But Ubuntu itself is something that I came into contact with when I first traveled to Africa. Many years ago, it was my first teaching job abroad. I went to Kenya. And I felt this amazing sense of belonging and of welcome and the people's smiles and the generosity. And there was just something different. People had warned me. Actually, people had told me two things. One was a warning, you're going to get culture shock going to Africa. But another person said, once you've lived in Africa, it'll get into your bones or your blood and you'll never want to leave. And for me, it was actually very much the second aspect. And on my way here, 5 days ago, I had a lovely surprise. I was at Paris airport and I saw in the cafeteria a can of Ubuntu Cola. I thought, what on earth could this be? And you might be able to see on your screen there the fair trade symbol. So the fair trade means that all the resources to make this cola have come, having been investigated to make sure there's no child labor, there's no abuse in any way, and everything is resourced in an ethical manner. So this is a clue already for those of you who are not quite sure what Ubuntu means. We're going to be exploring it during this evening's webinar. On the back of the can, it has a slogan, Ubuntu, I am because we are. So in other words, my existence is actually connected and bound very much to your existence. It's actually you being here today on this webinar that gives me a sense of purpose, a sense of value, and a great joy actually to be part of you all. So we're actually making our own little Ubuntu community, if you like, simply by being here on this webinar. But I hope you've noticed I've also put the nice packet of nuts and raisins next to it, because nothing will convince me, Ubuntu or no Ubuntu, that cola is any good for my health. So the can remains closed, but now I carry it with me to all my Ubuntu seminars just for a little bit of light-hearted introduction to Ubuntu. So what is Ubuntu? And I asked this question at, I carried out a workshop today at the Oman Development Bank, which actually their vision and their mission is very much Ubuntu. Their aim is to help small enterprises in Oman, to help poor people to get a foot onto the job scale. They deal in microcredit and other very interesting projects to help bring the community together. This is something I've always loved about Oman. It's a very community-based country. The people are very warm, very generous. And there is this spirit of Ubuntu, which I found in Africa, and now I find here. So this morning, I introduced my topic with this slide, with the Arabic down below. Just a quick introduction to my journey and this big chapter of my life, actually, which has been very connected with Ubuntu. My first job away from England was in Kenya. I was very excited. I left, I went for 3 years, and this is where I started to feel this sense of belonging and interconnectedness. I didn't feel that I was different. Later on, I actually came to this tiny little, not island, but it's like an island in the middle of South Africa, this little country called Swaziland. When I was there, Nelson Mandela was in prison. I'm talking about the early 1980s. And Swaziland was like a little oasis. It was a little bit like Switzerland. It was neutral politically. And apartheid actually didn't exist in Swaziland. But as soon as you went over the border into South Africa, there it was, whites only. If you went through the customs, whites only or blacks only entry points, and the whites only had air conditioning and nice sofas and very, very nice cup of coffee. And the blacks only, you had to stand out in the pouring rain or the hot sunshine, and you were moved along, herded along like cattle. So I was very aware of this apartheid, this racism, right on the border of where I was living. But in Swaziland, I didn't feel in any way different from the people who surrounded me. And I asked a good friend of mine, Moses. Moses had actually been involved in the Soweto riots back in 1976, where young leaders led their classes out in a peaceful rebellion, a peaceful protest against having to be taught in Afrikaans instead of being taught in England, in English, or in their own language. And they were fired upon by the white South African police, and Moses, this friend of mine, his twin brother, died in his arms. He was also leading his class. And so I said to Moses, who actually was a refugee in Swaziland, I said to him, how come you accept me as a friend? I'm a white person. And he said to me, we don't hate white people. I have nothing against white people. It's just that some of them have a rather strange attitude. And I was very touched by this comment, because he obviously wasn't thinking about the color of the skin. He actually didn't dislike the people, but he was just talking about their attitude or their behavior that he couldn't understand, not even that he didn't like. And I felt this was very big-hearted, and I was very, very attracted to that. Oman, where I'll just point to Oman here, this is where I spent 9 years, the last 9 years of my life in Oman, and I found very similar sort of attitudes, very similar sort of feelings. And it wasn't until later that I realized that Oman used to be the Sultanate of Zanzibar and Muscat. It stretched all the way down the east coast of Africa, right down to Mozambique. This was all the Sultanate of Oman. So very interesting for me that Kenya and Oman are linked geographically and politically and culturally as well. So this feeling of Ubuntu is very similar in both countries. The word Ubuntu actually comes from a root, umtu, which actually means a human being. And you get similar words, for example, in Burundi, you get Ubuntu. You get other words like bota and mutu in Zimbabwe and Botswana, and they all have the same sort of meaning. And it's very deep, actually. It's not just one value like peace or even dignity. It encompasses a whole family of values which are to do with living together in harmony. Can I ask our moderator, can you still see my PowerPoint? Because it's gone off my screen.
No, it's not visible any longer, Helen.
Right. Is it visible now?
Yes, you're back. You're back now.
Thank goodness.
The screen of Africa now. We have it.
Got it. Good. That's a relief. I, of course, prefer this map because here we are. There are no boundaries. And there's also another part of this map that I've traveled to a lot in my life, and that's India, where again, I feel this same wonderful feeling, this human warmth, this sense of belonging. And so I use this idea of unity and coming together, different nationalities living together in harmony, to write a training manual, which I've been using in the last few days, which is actually called Ubuntu, the Spirit of Humanity. Here's the Arabic version, where I've used this symbol of the world being held up by hands of many colors and a bright light shining from behind. And there you can see the logo, I am because we are. And the manual has been translated into French and Spanish. Konkani, I've been doing a project in Goa in southern India, and for ladies in the villages and teachers, local teachers, so that they can actually teach activities to help the spirit of community in their own local languages. So the book is being translated, I think it's in 6 languages now. Back to Ubuntu and what is it all about? So here, a lovely picture. You've probably seen this picture before. It circulates on Facebook from time to time. But there's a little story behind this picture for me. And it's about an anthropologist who came to study one of the African tribes, not sure which country. And in a little village, he saw some children under a tree. And so he thought, let me see how they behave. He got a big basket of fruit and put the fruit under another tree. And he called out to the children, just a small group of them, 5 or 6. Children, first one to get here, the basket of fruit is for you. What did the children do? They all took each other's arms and ran along together, sat around the basket and shared the fruit. So the anthropologist said to them, but just a minute, any one of you could have come and had the whole fruit to yourself. And one of them looked at him and said, but that's not Ubuntu. How can I be happy if my friend is sad? So that gives you a little bit of the spirit. Here's an example that I'd like to share with you. This lady is a very accomplished pianist in France. Her name is Elizabeth Stobart. And she, when she was very young, she relates the story. She was about, I think, only 8. She was brilliant right from an early age. And she won a competition. But what spoilt it for her was when she looked and she saw the faces on some of the other children who hadn't won. And of course, they looked quite sad. And she felt that the others had played just as beautifully as she had. And what a shame that she was the winner and all the rest, even if they had 1 point below her, they were the losers. And from that day, her aim was to share her talents so that everyone benefits and no one feels left out. And so now she's created a foundation where groups of pianists and musicians go to old folks' homes, they go to orphanages, to hospitals, and share classical music, beautiful piano recitals, to help spread the beauty of music throughout society. So this is, again, the spirit of Ubuntu. Maybe she hasn't even heard the word, but this is an illustration for me of the spirit of Ubuntu. Another little example I'd like to share with you is in Ubuntu societies. Of course, I wonder how many real Ubuntu societies there are now with globalization and urbanization, but still, if you go into the villages, you feel this spirit. And when I lived in Swaziland, I used to walk on my own. It was very safe in those days. In the villages, I used to take long, long walks. Everywhere I went, people would come running out to greet me. And from these little simple huts, the lady would come out with a glass of water or even a bowl of rice. That might be all that she had in her home, but it would be given to me with such royalty, such dignity. I felt like a queen. And for someone so poor to be so welcoming, I felt very touched, because of course where I come from, we usually put a fence and a lock on our doors and we keep strangers out rather than welcoming them in. And I also noticed in the villages, you hardly ever heard children crying, because they were always close to the mother. And the older children would then take some of the younger children and keep them close. The mother in some of the villages would have a big shawl around her. You may have seen them in photos. And she would either breastfeed the baby on the front or swing the baby around to the back and continue with her chores, her household work. And the baby would be close again on the back. So this lovely closeness meant that there was safety and comfort, and you just hardly ever heard crying in the villages. This was something that I noted. Another thing I would like to share with you, just to bring across what is Ubuntu, if someone had committed something wrong, someone had stolen something or misbehaved or lied, some small crime or misbehavior, instead of punishing, in fact, there were no prisons until probably halfway through the last century. What they would do with that person is they would gently take the person into the forest or into a beautiful place, and it was usually the women, but not always, and they would spend a day with that person. They would treat the person to lovely food, they would have singing and dancing, and they would celebrate that person. They would tell them how wonderful they were and what they remember about them as a child. You were such a gentle person, you were so clever, you were so creative, etc. You're such a strong person. They would empower this person. They wouldn't talk about what they'd done wrong, they would talk about everything good about that person. And so the effect, as you can probably imagine, was that that person would feel good about themselves, would realize for themselves their mistake without being ashamed into admitting, and then would actually come out of it and transform themselves. And the Ubuntu principle of I am because we are was that if even one person had created a mistake, it was as if the whole village was affected. It was like a wound or an open sore that affected everyone. And so until that wound was healed, the whole community felt infected, in inverted commas. And so this was like a healing process, not only for the perpetrator, but for the whole village. And at the end of the day, there would be some celebrations, some dancing, etc. And whatever had happened, finished, let's move on. This just summarizes a little bit of what the situation that I just told you about. You might like to just read it quietly to yourself.
Helen, if I can interrupt you, someone from the start raise a hand. I would like to ask people who wants to just to participate. The best thing is to put your question into the chat, and then we can, because you are muted, so it's not possible for you to talk. But if you want to write your question in the chat box, I will then interrupt Helen and just read the question for you. Sorry, Helen, to interrupt, but I know someone raised a hand from the very beginning, and I just can't manage to talk individually. So please, if you have question or comment, use the chat box. Thank you very much.
Good.
Sorry.
Are there any questions yet, Pascal? Any questions?
No, someone raised a hand, but otherwise, no. Okay. Everybody's listening attentively.
Oh, that's very good. But please, anyone, I'm very happy that this could be more of a dialogue than a monologue. I really don't mind. This is just a photograph.
I see the person still raise a hand. We cannot give, it's not possible to talk, so please use the chat box and write your comment or your question, and I will read it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal. Not at all. Here's another little typical scene in an African rural setting where the village comes together to discuss maybe an issue or just a project. Everyone comes together, shares, gives their ideas, listens to the other, until eventually a consensus decision is made. So it's not even about the majority decision, it's actually everyone sharing, discussing, putting their ideas, listening, until finally everyone says, yes, we're together on that. And then the decision is put into practice. And here I am now in Oman, and this is very much the system here. It's called the Majlis. And instead of having a two-party democracy, they have what's called the Majlis al-Shura, and it's like a circle of ministers. They sit together around a round table, and they discuss the issues in Oman, and they come to a joint decision. Everyone has to agree. This often means that decisions take a long time, but once they've been made, because everyone is behind it, then there's strength behind that decision, and it usually goes very well. So again, I had to get used to this. Living in Oman at first, I put forward some ideas, I had some project proposals, etc., and things just didn't seem to work, and things took so long. But then, one by one, once these proposals were accepted, then it was plain sailing. And so I just had to learn that this requires patience, it requires time to get everyone together, but it works in the long run. This lovely role model of Ubuntu, Nelson Mandela. And this was what he said about Ubuntu. It's a universal truth, a universal way of life. It's a word that you find in certain parts of Africa, but actually it talks about the human soul. And once we dig deep enough in any culture, we find it's there. The spirit of humanity is definitely there. And this has been my passion, actually, is to develop workshops and training courses to try to help people through different activities and sharing experiences to actually feel what Ubuntu is. It's not just a philosophy, and it really is a way of life. It's a code of ethics, one could say. And so I've been running these workshops in different parts of the world, and at the end of the workshop, I usually ask everyone to give their own definition of Ubuntu, because there isn't any one standard definition. You can go on Google after this webinar if you like, and you'll find many different expressions. They're all saying, perhaps in the end, the same sort of thing, but there's no one definition. And so in Oman, people come out with their definitions, very similar to the definitions of a workshop in Germany, very similar to the definitions of a workshop in Egypt and in Goa, etc. So this has really shown me that these values and this sense of belonging, this Ubuntu spirit, is universal. This is something that Barack Obama said when he went to the funeral of Nelson Mandela. There is a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, a word that captures Mandela's greatest gift, his recognition that we are all bound together in ways that are invisible to the eye, that there is a oneness to humanity, that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us. You can imagine I was overjoyed when I heard this being broadcast to the world, because it was always my dream that Ubuntu would at some stage become a household word. Nowadays, people use the word Ubuntu it's the name for some sort of open source software, which of course is about sharing. It's a software which people can share and it doesn't cost anything. So this was Barack Obama, touched by the beauty of this soul, Nelson Mandela. And when I was in Swaziland and Mandela was in jail, he became quite a role model for me. I was touched by the stories about him, and many years later I went to Robben Island off Cape Town to visit his prison. He was in prison for a total of 27 years. Most of that was on Robben Island, and his prison cell wasn't even long enough for him to stretch out. He had to actually lie diagonally. It was such a small cell. And then he had to do this hard work, chopping away at granite to make small stones. This is what the prisoners had to do for their daily work. But during all of that time, he never lost his sense of dignity and respect. And even when the guards came and hurled insults at him, they called him I won't even suggest some of the words that they called him, but he would always return with a smile and with respect and good morning, how are you? And eventually he actually started to teach some of the guards, because they were not educated, whereas he was educated in law and various subjects. He started to teach some of them maths and law, and he became their tutor in a way. And when he was elected president, they were there in the front row. And again, at his funeral, the prison guards were there to pay their last respects to someone who had actually changed their lives because of this incredible human quality of tolerance, respect, dignity, togetherness. And of course, Mandela's vision was to create a rainbow nation where people of many colors would come together and live in harmony.
Helen, we have a question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
So one of our attendants said that in a way, this is spirit of inclusion. Many of us work with different organizations, different cultures, fostering a spirit of teamwork and inclusion. Can you share one of your activities which might be useful for us? Thanks. It's from Perry Namazi, who is just happy to see you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, in fact, I'm just coming along. In a couple of minutes, I will actually come to share some of the activities. So you've asked this question at a good moment. If you could just bear with me, I'll go through a couple of more ideas, and then I will come onto the activities, and I will keep your question in mind specifically and share that point, the spirit of inclusion. Is that okay if I do that? I'll just move on a little bit,
sure.
And then I'll bring the answer. Thank you very much. Here we have Mary Robinson, who used to be head of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And she says something a little bit similar. We can draw inspiration from Ubuntu, the ancient term which embraces humaneness, caring, sharing, being in harmony with all the world. Ubuntu empowers everyone to be valued, to reach their full potential while remaining in unity with everything and everyone around them. It sounds almost utopian, but of course, we are all in the field of training or intercultural education in this group, I'm sure in this webinar group. And so unless we hold that vision that's possible, then of course we can help make it happen. here is another role model, and this is the Sultan of Oman. When he was a little bit younger, when I first came to Oman, he used to conduct these Meet the People tours. He used to go for 1 month into the middle of the desert, into the far, far reaches of Oman, where you just had Bedouins living in a very simple lifestyle. And he would bring a big tent and about 6 or 7 ministers, and then he would talk to the people. So here's a little elder from a village in the middle of nowhere speaking to the Sultan of Oman, telling him, we need more roads, or we need better irrigation. And the Sultan would then turn around, speak to the minister and say, can you sort this out? Give me feedback after 6 months. He would always follow it up. And in this way, little by little, a country that 47 years ago was totally backward, only 8 kilometers of tarmac road, 1 clinic and 1 school, is now a fully developed country. Absolutely fabulous. But it's been built little by little by little, but with the wishes of the community. And he's really very much accepted as a father figure. Very humble. You don't see him standing on pedestals, crying out how wonderful he is to the world, or even what the country does for the world. It's all done in a very quiet way. You don't hear very much about Oman, but I can assure you, a lot is happening here, and a lot of help is being offered, often in incognito ways, to other countries, to Yemen, to Syria, to many countries in the world, but in a very quiet, diplomatic way. His Majesty's aim is never to make an enemy of any country, and that no country should have Oman as its enemy. And this has been the foundation of incredible diplomacy. So, coming to your question, here we are. I have used in my training Ubuntu as a framework to explore universal values, creativity, empathy, communication skills, intercultural understanding, etc. Very recently, this was at Bournemouth University, and they actually had a day. It was the Vice-Chancellor that had initiated this project. Now they have a day every year called Kindness Day, and this was a kindness summit where they invited professors and students to come together for a day to just really explore what really do we mean by kindness and how can we use it at every level within the university. And this was my introductory icebreaker, and I was getting people to just walk around and meet each other, and they had a card, a blank card with their name on it, and they went to meet each other with this blank card as if it was a visiting card, and they stopped and talked at random to someone that they didn't know before. Now, this actually is related to the greetings in Africa and in Oman and in many countries, where a greeting is not just hello, and then you go about your business, but it's a whole ritual almost. And here in Oman, it's assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum salam, kif halik, alhamdulillah, kif sahdi. There's about 5 or 6 questions you ask each other. The answer is nearly always, I'm fine and everything's fine. But as you're exchanging in this way, you're becoming at ease with the other person, you're smiling and you're connecting with them. Now, in South Africa, the greeting is sawubona. And sawubona means I see you. Of course, obviously with our eyes we see, but it's deeper than that. It's actually I see you, the soul, the person behind the face, and I connect with you. In India, people say namaste, which means I bow to the light within you or to the dignity within you. And so at the beginning of most of my workshops, I just get people to get up, have their business card with them, in other words, a blank piece of paper with their name, go and just engage with somebody, but make sure you really get to know them, not superficially. Little exchange, and then write on their business card, not on your own, 2 qualities that you see in that person. maybe sincerity, maybe cheerfulness, maybe kindness on this particular day, for example, enthusiasm, whatever quality just touches you, write it on their business card. Take back your own business card and go and meet the next person. And so there's a lovely rhythm going on in this icebreaker where people meet probably about 10 people. The activity takes 15 minutes perhaps. And what people are doing is they're exchanging themselves with each other, getting to know each other just through a very brief conversation, but observing a particular quality in the other person. Not just the clothes they're wearing or the lovely hairstyle or the beautiful perfume, etc., but something about them, and then writing it down. And then what this does is this creates a beautiful atmosphere of belonging right from the beginning, of connectedness and seeing beyond all the differences to what we have in common. And then people read their business cards and they see all the beautiful qualities that other people have seen in them. And it's very empowering. And it's a very good start to any workshop. And I've done this with managers, little children, street children, teachers. It just works across the board. And a lot of teachers now use this on the first day of term with their students. Instead of them all sitting in their desks and at the end of the term they only know the people around them, right from day one, everyone gets to meet everyone and gets to know them and acknowledge them on the basis of the qualities that they see in the other person. So here they are exchanging their business cards. And this is what I was talking, this was the Namaste greeting in India. The divine light in me sees the divine light in you. I mean, I don't overemphasize the idea of the light and the soul, etc., but it just helps people to connect. This is another activity I use. I use the analogy, the metaphor. I love using metaphors, by the way, in training, because this training, Ubuntu, it's all about values, which of course are, well, invisible, intangible, but of course very real, because that's what we're all about. And so rather than talking directly about values, the activities I use, I like to use metaphors. And this particular activity, I use the metaphor of the tree. And we go through every part of the tree. The roots, for example, the roots of a tree give it stability, give it a foundation. What is your foundation? What is it that gives you stability when there's a storm happening in your life? What is it that you can put down deep? What is it that anchors you to yourself? It may be courage. It may be determination. Each person in silence reflects and starts to create their tree, writing down a word that touches them about that particular metaphor in the tree. The trunk draws the tree high. In Oman, we have these amazing coconut palms in the south, which almost touch the sky. I tell you, they're very, very tall. They just keep growing, growing, growing towards the sun. So I use this metaphor. What is it about you that keeps you growing strong, growing high, growing tall towards your dreams, towards your goals? Let the thought just come intuitively. I try to help the participants not to think too much, not to use the head too much, but allow these messages to come, and then they can write them down. So for example, the trunk, it could be positivity or optimism, and so on and so forth. The leaves give oxygen, they give beauty, they give shade, especially in Oman. They give food, they give shelter. What is it about you? What is your gift? What is it that you give to the world, that you share to your community? Write it. Draw a leaf or draw the leaves and write it there, and so on. The flowers, the fruit, what is the sunshine? What is it that gives you power and energy? The rain is refreshment. What is it that refreshes you? So they draw some rain and they write it down. And I find this analogy of the tree really helps people to reflect on their own values without asking the direct question, what are your values? This is difficult for many people to answer, and particularly in, I have to keep saying Oman because I'm here at the moment, but people are very modest and are expected to be modest. You wouldn't boast in front of a group and say, well, you know, I'm dynamic and enthusiastic and generous. But because you've done it using a metaphor and other people have given their ideas of what your values are, then it sort of gives you permission to express and to acknowledge your own values. And so here, having done the tree, they're discussing, sharing, learning from each other. This was a tree in India, in Goa. Same principle and very similar values. Back to Oman, just the other day. Here we are in Arabic. I hope at least one or two of you in the audience speak or can read Arabic. Here we are back in Goa. Now here, back to your question about interconnectedness. This is a lovely activity that I use. And it's, if you're especially in a nice environment and you've got a little bit of nature around you, I send the whole audience off on a silent walk. 15 minutes, not talking to each other, and just noticing trees, flowers, etc. Feeling it, sitting within nature. You'd be surprised the effect this has on some people. This particular lady, as she walked in this corner of the garden, she came back so excited. She said, I saw this huge lizard sitting on the wall. It was this big, she said, holding her arms out about half a meter at least. It was huge, she said. My friend turned around to me and she said, actually, this is a very common lizard. You find them everywhere. But of course, you have to be quiet. You have to be in tune with nature to even see them. Otherwise, they will just quietly slip away. And it was because she, probably for the first time in her life, was actually walking quietly, in tune with herself, connected with nature, that she actually observed this animal, and the animal didn't run away from her. She said it was almost as if we had a silent connection and communication. So this is another example of an activity brilliant for children, especially in today's world where children are rather disconnected from the natural world, but they love it. They really love it. Just connect yourself with nature, go out there, be silent, touch the leaves, touch the flowers, feel at one with nature. It's very therapeutic, I can absolutely guarantee. Here's a couple of words from Martin Luther King which talks about this interconnectedness. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. You can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. I love that quotation, and it's well worth reflecting on, and just illustrates this interconnectedness. Back to Bournemouth in England, and this was our final photograph at the end. Bournemouth University, they consider themselves a place of excellence, but random acts of kindness, which are often considered something that you do in primary school, they felt that this is absolutely necessary at the level of management, different departments. Kindness has to be integrated at every level. So at this summit, there were a few of us running workshops, and my workshop was simply called Ubuntu is ... Part of a group of new thinking workshops, how to think in a different way, but how to act in a different way in our departments. One aspect of Ubuntu is this whole area of forgiveness and reconciliation. And so here's a little workshop that I ran with some teachers in a school in Kuwait, the Kuwait American School. And the teachers are very international. And it's very important that the teachers bond together. And this is part of the Living Values Education Association that I've been part of for 25 years. And actually the style of workshops is very much derived from the methodology used by Living Values Education. It's like a family of educators from all over the world. And the training and the workshops that we deliver are very experiential, creative, all about sharing ideas together. And so this was a workshop that I did in Kuwait with a very international group of staff. And in fact, these staff were selected by the board on the basis of their values, on the basis of their integrity and of their absolute dedication to share values through whatever subject they were teaching, that they don't separate, oh yes, well, I'm a science teacher, that's got nothing to do with values. Oh yes, it has. As a science teacher, values comes into every part of what you do. A scientist needs to be an ethical scientist from the word go. And so we did this particular workshop on forgiveness. And it brought to mind, here we are, here are some of the teachers. And it brought to mind a situation in Africa. I got to know someone, he was a street child. He was brought up in Togo. He was tossed out by a polygamous father who wanted nothing to do with his son. He tied him up in ropes and put pepper in his eyes and tossed him out into the street. Well, that was it. This person decided from that day he wanted nothing to do with his father. He became a street child. He fended for himself. And he learned the ways of his friends also living on the street. But somehow deeply ingrained in him was this compassion and this sense of forgiveness. And I remember once sharing with him that how difficult I found it to get on with my father sometimes, because I couldn't forgive him for some of the things that he did when I was a child. And this person, his name is Rene, and he said, but Helen, how can you have to forgive your father. He's your dear father. One day he'll be old. One day he will pass away. He needs your love. He needs your forgiveness. And this struck me so deeply, that here was someone who'd been horribly abused by his father, but still his attitude was, if it's your father, you must forgive, you must show love, especially as he's getting old. And that was a turning point for me, and that was the beginning of my transition and a healing of my relationship with my father. And also an understanding that actually probably while I thought that I had to forgive my father, there was a side of me that was very difficult for my father to forgive. And once I realized it was actually a two-way process, then we started to forgive each other, and now our relationship is very good and very loving. I can't even remember the things that I had thought I had to forgive him for. And I noticed with this African community that I was closely connected with in Swaziland, if two people had the slightest little argument, they would just have the argument, and then 2 minutes later they would be patting each other on the back, shaking hands, walking off as if nothing happened. In other words, the process of forgiveness and reconciliation happens instantly. This is part of Ubuntu.
Thank you, Helen. Is there any other question? Is there a question or comment? Do you hear me?
We seem to have lost Helen.
Yeah. What is your suggestion, Steve? What can we do? Can we try to get Helen back?
Yeah, why don't we take some questions or give people time to ask questions in the chat window?
Yes, they've started doing that. Let's hope she's joining us again. Maybe.
Yes, hopefully Helen will join.
Connected and will soon. So we're still waiting. So I'm reading all the questions, so I'm still there and hope we get Helen back in a little while. I hope she knows how to reconnect. Here it's, yes, Helen, welcome back.
I'm so sorry. Are we all still together?
Yeah, and so that gave the participant the time to write question and comment. So if you're ready, I'm going to read some of them.
Very good. Now, I'm so sorry the internet just crashed here, but we're back online again. I'm so sorry about that.
Okay.
Is my screen? Can you see my screen still?
Well, we see you, but
yes?
we don't see I don't see the slides, and I guess the others don't either.
Probably not. Now, it might take a little. How much longer do we have, Pascal?
Well, we have a bit less than 10 minutes, and there's many comments. I don't know if while you maybe try to get the slides back, I can just maybe read the comments and eventually the question.
That sounds like a good idea.
So we have a question here. What would some universal value be in your opinion? We have also a comment to say, very impressed by your presentation and the concept of Ubuntu. Great sharing and learning.
Thank you.
Let's see. Thank you for your wisdom. I would like to know where we can find more about the training book.
Yes.
Somebody else, I love the Ubuntu tree activity. Thank you for sharing. Can you please share the most powerful Ubuntu moment of transformation in your life and what led you there? Somebody else say, your speech, Helen, was very touching. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, let's see, does Helen do a train the trainer for Ubuntu workshop? Have you published some of your training activities IDs?
Yes.
It's Ubuntu Heritage that has created a tribal of peace and reconciliation. Well, is it because of the Ubuntu in Heritage that created the tribunals of peace and reconciliation in South Africa in the 90s?
Yes.
Another thank you is Ubuntu sense of being or an activity, something you actively do. If so, can you give an example of the process you undertake?
Great.
Okay, so I think you've got enough now. And
I've certainly got enough. And I'm not going to even try to bring up my slides because, in fact, the rest of the slides were just photographs of different workshops in different parts of the world. And I don't want to risk breaking the connection or doing anything wrong.
We have only 5 minutes, you know, Helen. I guess you won't have time to answer all the questions.
Let me
Maybe
give you
you can do some.
Answers. Yes. First of all, anyone who would like a copy of my book, I'm very happy to send you a PDF. I don't know if you want to send your email to Pascal or even to me. Pascal could possibly give my email. I would be very happy to send you the PDF. At the moment, I don't have very many hard copies to send you. So at the moment, a PDF, but that would give you all of the activities that I use in my training. And yes, I have done training of trainers. That workshop in Kuwait at the school, that was actually a training of trainers. And at the moment here in Oman, I'm taking part in a number of Train the Trainer courses. I'm not doing the whole course, which is 10 days, but I'm doing one day, which they consider very important in the training of trainers, which is bringing ethics and values into our training using Ubuntu as a framework. So I hope that answers that question. Let me give you this transformative moment, which was very touching. It was actually the day that I was leaving Kenya. And I said goodbye to some of my expatriate friends. I used to play a lot of tennis. I went to the tennis club, said goodbye to them, and they waved to me, "Goodbye, Helen, all the best." And as I walked out, I thought, oh, perhaps tomorrow they won't even remember me, but never mind, I've got to get back to my house because I have a plane to catch tonight. I went back home, and a few minutes later there was a knock on the door. Who could this be at such a late hour? I opened the door, and there was a line in front of me of African people that I had got to know over the 3 years of living in Kenya. And there was the little old lady in the market who always kept the best mangoes for me. She would hide them behind, and when she saw me, here's your mango. And there was a little old man who used to sit by the side of the road, and when I drove to the school where I taught, he would wave at me and I would wave back. We never exchanged a word. Somehow he knew I was leaving. And this again is part of Ubuntu. Everyone knows what's happening. There were a couple of children that used to play in the garden and climb the trees. They came. There was a little girl who I used to give old pieces of clothing and bits and pieces, nothing even new. She came. There was a school secretary who used to teach me Swahili. She was there. These people stood in a line in front of me, and each one took my hand and said, "May God go with you. May you always have happiness." They squeezed my hand, each one in turn, and looked into my eyes, and I was gobsmacked. I had this feeling, I don't know if you've ever had a feeling where you have this lump in your throat. And I just thought to myself, my goodness, these people, they know how to say goodbye, and it means something. And I have never, ever forgotten that scene. I can see it in front of me. It was almost 40 years ago. It was as if it was yesterday. And these were my really true, deep friends who I hardly knew, but somehow we knew each other. This was Ubuntu. So that was a transformative message. I didn't even know the word Ubuntu, by the way, till years after I had left Swaziland. It came up at a United Nations conference. And then when someone started to explain it to me, I thought, yes, that's what it was that pulled me back to Africa. And by the way, I've been to 24 countries in Africa, mostly doing this living values training for teachers and street children educators. It keeps pulling me back, and it's because of this Ubuntu. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, that was initiated by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, is totally based on Ubuntu, absolutely. And in other countries, for example, in Rwanda, after the genocide, they tried to bring back this ancient traditional way of bringing reconciliation rather than punishment. And of course, you can imagine the challenge of bringing people together for forgiveness and reconciliation after they'd murdered half of your family. It had limited success, but the principle was there of reconciliation rather than punishment. So yes, these are some modern day examples of using an ancient system and this ancient wisdom to resolve some of today's issues. What were the other questions?
Helen, I think we have to stop, maybe to leave you another minute, but we are really getting to the end of our webinar, and I'm really sorry. It's really fascinating, and I think everybody is interested, and I think most of the attendants have asked to have a copy of your book and send thank you words. So thank you very much. So maybe what I would like to tell the other participants is that you will get a quick feedback form that we would like you to fill in, and it's just a few questions to answer. It won't take long. And I just want already to announce the next webinar that will be taking place on the 17th of April, and we will have Boyd Johnson talking about how to manage a global research team successfully. So anyway, Helen, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all those who have joined us tonight or today for some of you. And I wish we'll see each other next month. Best greetings to all.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure from me, and sunny greetings from Oman, and hope to meet some of you in the future.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you.